From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Welcome everybody, welcome back to Rare Books and to another in a series of Rare Book Forums. Those of you who've been around for a while may remember in the last few years at the end of the summer when junior fellows are finishing up their work, we have had the opportunity in some cases to allow junior fellows to give a talk. And that's what's happening today with Yoshi Hill. Hannah Stahl and Andrea Kincaid, if you'll stand up, are other two fabulous junior fellows who've been working We've always been very fortunate and rare that we get these stellar junior fellows who come in and place order and control over our confused lives. And they've been doing the same. They've been working in copyright and most importantly added another 5,000 records to the Lincoln Stern collection, which is overwhelming. So. Yoshi Hill came in and was working in the Lessing J. Rosenwald collection, as many of you know, is our stellar collection on the history of the illustrated book. And we had him working on a variety of projects, but he found himself bumping into 17th century France a lot. And he's studying French and will be going off to France, he says, to learn French, but we all know better. So we thought we'd better give him some gravitas before he leaves. So we had him start to work with French publications, and he stumbled across an issue that he thought was interesting, and that's the origin of today's talk, which is to look at the nature of the French and the German Reformation, and to ask a very simple question, which is why are they different, or why were they different? And of course, as we all know in life, everything comes down to typography, and that's exactly what happened. So Yoshi's been plowing through some difficult material. Some of it's difficult to master, and he's done really a brilliant job. And we're thrilled to be able to give him this opportunity to present this in front of friends. So without further ado, Yoshi Hill.
Thank you very much for coming out today. My name is Yoshi Hill. I am a junior fellow in the Rosenwald collection. And today I'll be discussing the Reformation through the book. And my talk has 4 parts. The first, I'll be talking about early French printing. Next, I'll be talking about a subsequent golden age of typography. Third, I'll compare the German and French Reformations. And then finally, I'll give an anecdote about Robert Etienne, a man who went from being the king's personal typographer to one of the primary printers of Calvinist works in Geneva. So here, I'll start with this quote from Victor Hugo. And it really summarizes the climate of skepticism which is present in the early 16th century. The ideas are there, and finally, when they're combined with the books, the dissidents, the people who are complaining about the Catholic Church, are finally able to transmit their ideas to a wider audience and eventually foments the Reformation. And French printing starts here in Paris in 1470, which is relatively late compared to Italy and Germany. And it starts here at the Sorbonne in Paris. And the Sorbonne will be important later in my talk because it's the center of censorship for France. And here is a facsimile from Anatole Claudin, who's was one of the leading scholars of early French printing. And this is the first book ever printed in France. It's from 1470. It's a humanist work. And it's done in this Latin-style type. And it's similar to manuscript. It looks like handwriting. And it's printed by these 3 German artisans. So there's the German influence there too. Goering, Freiberger, and Krantz. And they're patronized by a French nobleman. Next, in the next decade, the French start to develop a printing culture of their own. And after these 10 years, they come up with this Lettre Bâtarde, which is uniquely French. And it's derived from contemporary French manuscripts. And you can see how France is no longer dependent on other countries for its printing culture. It's developing something of its own. And in this slide, in the last one, you can see how early printers are preserving aspects of manuscript. They wanted to have a gentle transition for their customers from manuscript to print. So you can see here, this very ornate initial. There are rubrications, the red and blue things, which divide up the text. And then also the types which they used were all similar. They mimic handwriting. And then this is a work from Lyon, and it's an Italian form of Gothic letter. You can see it's a little thicker, and it's an early printed work. And Lyon is this printing industry which develops as a counterweight to Paris. The censorship in Paris is very strong, and basically the Lyon printers, they make their money by printing what the Parisian printers can't print. And it's an industry geared toward popular stories such as this, Le Roman de la Rose, which is a tale of courtly love. So there are actually some serious growing pains in the spread of French print, which I didn't know when I came into this project. In the early 16th century, there were around 30 locations with presses, but within 20 years, the number falls to 3. And it's due to several factors. First is that customers are still attached to manuscript. They're not used to this printed medium. It's too foreign for them. Second, as a result, in provincial towns, the demand's just not there. So these small shops in the smaller cities can't survive. And finally, Latin books are really essential. They're the main things which customers are buying. And they're serious undertakings. There are big projects which take a long time, and only the biggest printing presses are able to produce them. So all the other ones are unable to cope with this demand and remain financially sustainable. But in the long term, this centralization, which the Paris, Lyon, Rouen emerge as the centers of printing. And it results in this sophistication of the printing industry. When the people are in constant contact, they refine and make these fine types, and the book arts enter this really glorious period. And Paris becomes one of these printing hubs of Europe. And so this concentration leads to a great deal of sophistication. And the first 60 years are considered a golden age of typography for France. And on the left, I have a picture of Claude Garamond, who's considered one of the finest type cutters in history. And he inspires fonts such as Times New Roman, Garamond, which I'm using in this presentation, cheesily enough. It works. And on the right, I just have a picture of the Vitruvian Man, and it's the influence of the Renaissance on French typography cannot be overstated. So the origins of this golden age come from Italy. In this book, the Hypnorata Machia Polifili, pronounce it correctly, really embodies the Renaissance in a book. First of all, it's written in a mix of Greek, Latin, and Italian languages, and this humanist, only the most intelligent humanists could understand and translate this really confusing work. And also you can see here the layout is very refined, it's simple, and the pages aren't crammed together, and they're able to embed images together with the text. Here's a close-up. And you can see this very clear, harmonious Roman typeface. And it's comfortable for ours because this is what we've adopted in contemporary times. And you can also see the woodcut. The illustration is rendered in a Renaissance style. And the Hypnorata Machia Polifili inspires Geoffrey Torrey, a humanist and typographer who journeys through Italy, and he returns with these Roman fonts and Renaissance values. And Champfleury is his effort to standardize fonts. He wanted to reform French spelling towards its humanist roots, towards Latin roots, and he sets these standards for French publishing which exist to this day. So here are just a couple close-ups. You can see the layout. He really masterfully, and you'll get to see it later after the presentation over there on the same page, but he masterfully embeds the images with text. And on the top left, you can see this image, which is vaguely similar to the Vitruvian Man, so you can understand how humanism really influenced Torrey. And he also has these famous diagrams, which are letters based on the portions of the human body, and it's symbolic of the humanist belief that human reason should be the source of knowledge, not an exterior force. And around the same time, this is a good excuse to show off a work from Dürer, he's producing the same kind of works. He has these ideal ratios and proportions, and this is his work on perspective and how to illustrate the human. And finally, one of the final projects which comes out of the Golden Age typography is this civilité type, and it's impossible to read for our eyes. But it comes out of the late 1550s, and it's a rendering of a Gothic cursive handwriting. And here's a close-up of it. This is actually a facsimile, unfortunately, but it really is indicative of the difference in French and German preferences. The French are very partial to these types which mimic handwriting and are also very fluid. They have a flow to them, and they value the form over the function. It doesn't really make sense when you have this kind of initial, which takes up so much space if you want to be efficient. Excuse me? I don't know. I actually don't know. Maybe a U? I don't know. And then here I'll juxtapose it with Germans. They're very content with these thick, angular, Gothic black letters. And we can see here how type is really a cultural response. And a quote which really aptly explains this golden age and why it came to pass is it comes from Harry Carter, who's one of these renowned typographers. And he said, "The best work was done when eminent men collected around their press as a community of scholars, artists, and tradesmen, where there was competent criticism, so that the people with ideas can move those with skilled hands." And this climate of criticism, it really parallels the descent of scholars and religious figures directed toward the Catholic Church leading up to the Reformation. These people are starting to complain and gathering together and sharing ideas and inspiring each other to rise up against the Catholic Church. And one of these first works which inspires the people is from Desiderius Erasmus, one of the most famous humanists. And he advises pious readers to pray knowledgeably in a manner rooted in Scripture. And he stresses the relationship between the Christian and the text, the Bible, and understanding them, not to rely on the interpretations or readings of others. And another person, Jean Boucher, who many of us have never heard of, he lays out his personal theology in this work here, and it's for the common man. It's not for the clergy. And it's groundbreaking in two ways, because it's printed in vernacular French. He did it for accessibility, so many more people could read it. But at the time, most theological works are printed in Latin, and to be considered authoritative, it had to be in Latin. And second, he is a layperson, and the Catholic Church does not allow the laity to dictate doctrine, but he takes this bold step trying to reform the church from within. And so you can see how Boucher and Erasmus are stressing the importance of reading and understanding the Bible by one's own reason, not on the interpretations or a preacher's interpretation. And in 1517, these impulses lead to Luther proclaiming his 95 Theses by nailing them on the door of the church at Wittenberg, and the Reformation begins. And many assume that the Reformations unfolded in the same manner, but regarding books, there are four main ways in which the French Reformation varies greatly from this German model, the German model of the Reformation. First is that Catholics in Germany, they refuse to engage in public debate. They see no reason to try and challenge the Protestants. They're very complacent. They're not willing to lower themselves to the level of the Protestants in their eyes. But in France, the French Protestants, the Huguenots, they are never able to dominate print. It's because the Catholics in France quickly realize that they need to take advantage of this medium to keep Catholicism as the main religion. Second, the German printing industry is very decentralized. There's a lot of centers of print, but they're all very robust industries. And they can survive on their own, and it's impossible to control the flow of Luther's works through Germany, and they spread everywhere. But in France, due to the crisis, it's a very concentrated industry, and Paris is one of the most heavily censored places in Europe, and it's impossible to get the flow of ideas through this country. And they prohibit Luther's works, and there's very serious punishments for having Luther's works. Third, there's German vernacular becomes the symbol of pride and change, and Luther used it to great effect to unite the people against the Catholic Church. In France, this never happens. It never attains the same status. And lastly, the fourth is that illustrations. The German Protestants are masters of using this Flugschriften medium, which are pamphlets, really easy to reproduce and spread all over the place. And they create these clear distinctions between good and evil. You can see Satan and then Luther, this juxtaposition where they are trying to draw in the illiterate classes and to join and convince them to join. And it's something that even the lowest person can understand. And the Catholics actually replicate this strategy. You can see here Luther as a messenger for the devil, and then also him conversing with Lucifer, I think it is. But it's too late. They replicate the process, but they're unable to turn the tide, and they've lost the popular cause. But in France, the Huguenots never employ illustrations. They see it as an impartial medium, which is meant for science and medicine, just to diagram and show human anatomy. And you can see the outcome of the Reformation here in this map. The pink shaded areas are where Protestantism is established. And you can see that in France, it's only isolated to these little dots. And those are cities where eventually they're isolated to this and they're eradicated, basically. There's St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, and Protestants either die or flee France in the end. And the main reason for the failure of the Reformation in France is that Catholicism never loses its status as the popular cause. In Germany, Luther unites the people against Catholicism as the popular cause, and he wins in the end. And you can see that much of Germany becomes Protestant. And I'll end this presentation with an anecdote about Robert Estienne, and his life really encapsulates the sentiments and ideas which foment the Reformation. He's born in 1503 in Paris, and he spends his formative years in his father's bookshop, and he's always surrounded by these scholars and humanists. And one of them on the left, Jacques Lefeve, is especially radical. He's known as being crazy with his ideas. And he wanted to reform the church from within, but these ideas were so radical that he would often embarrass his friends, and he was accused of heresy several times. And on the right is a book which Henry Estienne, Robert Estienne's father, printed for him, and it's the Arithmetic Principles of Bothius. And as a result of this upbringing in the bookshop, listening to these guys debate and dissent against each other, Estienne is heavily influenced by humanism for the rest of his life. And eventually, Henry Estienne passes away, and Robert inherits the family business. And he makes a name for himself, and soon enough, he's named the royal typographer of the King of France. And it's a very esteemed position. And one of the first things he does is he purchases this Greek italic type from Garamond, Claude Garamond, who is on an earlier slide. And it's considered one of the finest types in human history. It's this Greek italic. It's very fluid, and it looks like an italic we would see in Microsoft Word nowadays. And as royal typographer, he has some leeway with acting in a rebellious way. And Estienne, for him, Christianity he stressed the relationship between the Christian and Scripture, just like Boucher and Erasmus. And he really prioritized independent study of the Bible. So he would publish his own editions while he was royal typographer of the Bible with these extensive commentaries. And the censors of the Sorbonne don't like this agitation. They see that he's trying to chip away at their ideas, their doctrines, which they've set. And he keeps on doing it until it's too late, and he loses favor in the court, and the censors are able to convince the king to ban all of his editions of the Bible. And he realizes this situation is really untenable, and he decides to go to the next printing capital, which is Geneva. And he offers his services to John Calvin, who gladly accepts. He needs to keep his movement going. But with this move to Geneva, he endures a really tough transitional period. You can see here the type's not, it's imbalanced, it's off kilter a bit. And that's because he no longer has the royal types. With the royal types, they're exclusive for the works which are going to the king. And you can see how he's unable to transport most of his equipment, so he's adapting constantly to come up with these works. And lastly, there's really poor quality paper in Switzerland compared to that of France. After a while, though, the quality of his publications recovers, and his works become an integral part of the spread of Calvinism. And while in Paris, he actually was undergoing this really a questioning of his faith. He wasn't sure if Catholicism was the right faith for him, and he doesn't see it as the best fit. So finally, when he arrives in Geneva and he's been exposed to this culture and religion, he converts to Calvinism. And it's more in line with his idea of Christianity, where they're focusing on the readings and interpretations of the Bible. And I'll end the presentation with this quote for Victor Hugo yet again. And it reflects the way in which the book was not just a destroyer, but it was also, it preserved the Catholic Church in France, and in fact did completely transform Germany's religious and political composition. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you learned something today. Thank you.
It was a wonderful talk. We have time for questions. I know you have some.
Yes.
I've never heard this idea of a royal typographer.
Yeah.
It's such an intriguing idea. Could you talk more about like what his role was, like any and what power he could?
So basically, he would scour France to find the best types. Garamond was one of the best type cutters at that time. And there's actually a book over there, which is a pamphlet with specimens of the type which he had just bought for the king. And if you saw this specimen, a type similar to the specimens, you would know this is an authoritative text approved by the king. It's a form of censorship, because in France they're constantly worried about dissentious ideas, and they need this typographer to find the best fonts and make them monopolize them for the king.
Oh, so you know right away if it wasn't that
Yes,
font,
yes. So you can identify by
it might
font.
be even dangerous to have this in your hand.
Yes, yes. Yep.
My understanding of making a type is that the type is cut and then molds are made from that cut type. So multiple sets of the type could be molded and then disseminated. So in France, how do they control that?
They would just destroy. They would make sure they would have armed guards and make sure that only one copy, or as many copies as needed, are made, and they would destroy types if they were not being used by the king.
You guard the punches.
Yeah,
The matrices.
and it's crazy. You lock them away. Like, it's a very serious resource.
The punch is hard, and that's what keeps the letter. The matrix is soft and will eventually wear away. So as long as you guard the punch that makes the impression, you've guarded the letter.
Yep.
I'm intrigued by the idea of a bookshop or a printer shop being a center of discussion, of debate. I hadn't heard that before. Is that common in France?
Yeah, absolutely.
Bookshops everywhere, and I just never knew that.
They're actually, there's this the Latin Quarter in Paris is where all the bookmakers, the booksellers would be located, and it's a centralized location. And if you were in that area, you knew that these bookmakers were the best in the business, and that you could run into a scholar on pretty much any given day and engage in debate and discuss matters. So yeah, the bookshop is really a center of debate and leads to a lot of dissent.
And that's why you're going there.
Yes, yes.
And I think Aldous also in Italy he had his academy,
Yeah.
same kind of idea.
Any other questions? Yep.
The success of the Reformation in Germany is fairly geographically split
Yeah.
between the North and the South. Did you find differing uses of type by Catholics in South compared to North Germany?
I'm going to be honest. As a French major, I was very biased towards the French side of this project. I did my due diligence with the German part. I couldn't answer properly. Yep.
I never realized until your lecture the importance of the role of politics in the pre-Reformation period, because I didn't realize that the court served as the role of censor.
Yep.
Now I was aware, obviously, that France had been a United Nation for centuries. Germany, on the other hand, was composed of over 300 kingdoms, duchies, principalities, and whatever you will. And they weren't united until 1870. So this notion of pan-German censorship was impossible.
Yeah.
Would have been impossible anyway. So the local prince or count was able to do what he chose, which happened and then eventually led to the 30 Years' War. But I never thought of that in light of censorship. So politics played a great role.
Yeah. France has always been concerned with the centralization.
On both sides
Yeah.
of the Rhine.
Yep.
Quite interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep.
And I noticed by 1530 Sun, all England was Protestant,
Yes.
as a result.
Or they
of
were
the
supposed to
VIII.
be. Not a lot of
Yeah.
people weren't,
Yeah.
but officially, yes.
Because not too much before that, Henry VIII was having all of his.
Yeah.
And,
Certain
so that was
discretion.
pretty quick.
Yep.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Okay. We do have books on the table for you to look at that Yoshi has selected. I would ask, in fact, before everyone else get up, if the people at the picnic table carefully get up, move the benches in so we can make way for people to come look. Thank you for coming. This, of course, proves what we've always been saying here, what happens when you take active minds and let them loose in the Library of Congress for 3 months. So congratulations to all of our
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.